court.
My name is Beth Ratway, and I am a senior TA consultant at the American Institutes for Research.
And I'm John Deloach. I am the senior staff attorney and researcher for the South Carolina Association of Counties.
And we would like to meet you.
Hello, we are Unit 2. My name is Penny Smurden, and I will be from Reno High School, and I will be attending the University of Nevada.
Nice.
My name is Jody Hoover, and I will also be attending the University of Nevada.
My name is Jason Pitha, and I'll be going to San Diego State. Our unit coach is Mr. Sam Macaluso, and our teacher is Mr. Richard Clark.
Very nice to be with you today. We are here for Unit 2, Question 1, which I will read, and then we look forward to your response. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? You may begin.
To make stone soup, one must first gather the correct ingredients. Stone soup is a European folktale whose moral is to bring ingredients together to create something benefiting the people. The delegates at the Philadelphia Convention melted ideas for this new constitution, and the combination of these ideas was done to please the most people possible. Many of the delegates had opposing viewpoints on what ingredients should be included and which should be left out. In a letter to Benjamin Harrison, George Washington wrote, "I wish the Constitution which is offered had been made more perfect, but I sincerely believe it is the best that could be obtained at this time." The delegates did the best they could to use their ingredients and ultimately created stone soup for the people.
One major disagreement among the delegates was representation for states of drastically different populations. James Madison's Virginia plan offered a national government composed of 3 branches. This ingredient benefited states with large populations by giving them more representation based on the amount of free people living in a state.
Connecticut delegate William Johnson wanted to enhance the soup by adding a strong national government that could protect the rights of small states from encroachment by their larger counterparts. Johnson supported the New Jersey plan because it gave all states equal representation in the legislature. He advocated for small states and disputed the Virginia plan. In the end, he gave his full support to the Connecticut Compromise, still protecting small states.
Slavery was also a major issue at the convention. Luther Martin argued that slavery should not be protected in the Constitution. No delegate, however, called for the prohibition of slavery to be written. The need to compromise on slavery was great, and this unresolved issue resulted in the Civil War and the death of over 700,000 Americans. This was a bitter ingredient in the soup. The relationship between the states and the federal government discussed during the convention resulted in another major disagreement. Who should have the power of the military and what limitations should be imposed? George Mason, Richard Sherman, Eldridge Gary, and many other delegates vehemently argued against standing armies, Gary stating that they are dangerous in times of peace. His words were dismissed, and the convention imposed few limitations on Congress's power to raise an army.
Charles Pinckney suggested that state militias need uniformed training in arms in order to be effective. Article 1, Section 8 states, Congress would organize, arm, and discipline the militia, while states appoint the officers. Military power was given to Congress in Article 1, Section 8, and the President as Commander-in-Chief in Article 2, Section 2. The branches balanced, the stone soup was not overpowered by ingredients.
Article 2 is one of the most controversial yet bland ingredients in the stone soup. The emergency powers of the president are not mentioned in the Constitution, and therefore unresolved. Presidents have exercised this as an inherent power as commander-in-chief. During the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln unconstitutionally suspended habeas corpus.
Article 1, Section 9 states that only Congress can suspend habeas corpus during rebellion or invasion. Also, when President Harry Truman attempted to seize steel mills during the Korean War. Although the powers were still vague, the Supreme Court ruled that this ultimately overstepped his constitutional authority in the 1952 case of Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer. These became consequences of the framers' unresolved Article 2.
This panel is split on changes that should be made to the Constitution, but we do agree on one. The framers of the Constitution added Article 1, Section 3, which established state legislatures choosing senators. The 17th Amendment changed this, replacing it with the appointment of senators through direct election. This amendment needs to be repealed. George Mason observed that the state legislatures ought to have some means of defending themselves against encroachment of the national government.
The most adamant supporters of the 17th Amendment were urban political machines, hoping to easily sway the public with their slogans and campaigns to control state legislation. When only 9 states require civic education, how can we expect to trust the people in this matter? The 17th Amendment should be repealed because we are a republic, and the stone soup can be as good as it once was. Thank you.
Great. Beth, would you like to ask the first question?
Sure. So you said the panel was split. What were your major disagreements in terms of what changes need to be made to the Constitution?
So I would strengthen the takings clause under the Fifth Amendment for public use. In the case of Kello v. New London, landowners were taken of their private property and it was given to private developers under the public land use. So I would like to strengthen for that public use. After this case, 43 other states strengthened it as well. And so I would like to just implement it into the Fifth Amendment, or yeah.
My change would be giving Supreme Court justices one term and making it 18 years. This would allow for every president, every term to appoint 2 Supreme Court justices, making the judicial branch more accountable to the people and keeping it balanced between the parties.
I would require civic education in all 50 states. As of now, we only have 9 states plus Washington, D.C. that do require civic education. So we should require civic education in all states because it would help educate the people and make them more voter educated.
John?
All right. I guess, let me ask a fundamental question, and I asked this earlier. Is it time for the states to call a constitutional convention and just potentially rewrite a completely new constitution?
Well, in a letter from Thomas Jefferson, he states that we should rewrite the Constitution every generation or every 19 years. So coming from Thomas Jefferson's perspective, we should implement a constitutional convention in order to not necessarily completely rewrite the Constitution, but allow it to be revised in light of current times.
I disagree with my colleague. Article 5 allows for amendments to be made with 2/3 the consent of the Senate and Congress, and this allows for the Constitution to stay updated and solves many contemporary issues. So a convention is not needed today.
Instead of rewriting the entire Constitution, we could work to make the Constitution more functional. Yale law professor William Eskridge Jr. argued that functionality promised the evolution. And if we saw the Constitution as a living document open to change for its current day citizens, then it would make the Constitution more functional and not require a new convention.
You referred to slavery as being a bitter ingredient in the stone soup. For a number of people, it was probably the sweetest component because they got to essentially dictate the outcome of the convention. Was it a mistake for the drafters of the Constitution to leave the slavery question to future generations? Should they have bit the bullet then and not left it to the 19th century?
No, it was not a mistake because the founders compromised in order to pass the Constitution, and it allowed the new nation to live under the document and get used to that kind of government leading up to the Civil War. And if we hadn't compromised then, it's likely that a Civil War could have erupted before 1864, meaning that it could have had a different ending.
Well, but that's exactly the question. Would it have been better to have the Civil War using the technology of the 18th century than the 19th century if it came to that?
I think so. As we can see, the Civil War ended up with 3% of Americans killed, and in today's time that would be over 11 million Americans. And if this problem was solved during the drafting of the Constitution, many of those deaths could have been prevented.
Beth? Thank you. Beth?
Do you think it could have been solved? How could it have been solved differently during the convention?
Well, one way could have been the North could have formed their own union, and because the South did not have the economy to sustain itself, they eventually could have joined the northern states as long as they joined without slavery.
John?
How do you address today the still ongoing dispute between the states and the federal government, and over what exactly is the role of the federal government and what is the role of the state on a number of issues.
So when the framers first were framing the Constitution, they put in many clauses that were very vague, such as the Commerce Clause and the Unnecessary and Proper Clause. For example, Gonzales v. Raich, which allows the federal government to come into the state of California and not allow for the use of medical marijuana, even though the state of California allowed it. And so we can see that in some of these clauses, it allows for the federal government to not necessarily overstep, but go against the state governments. And so there is definitely a discrepancy between how the federal government functions and then also its relationship with the states.
So just out of curiosity, should President Biden order troops into Oregon and California to, and the other 24, I guess there are 24 states now that allow for marijuana use, to enforce Raich versus Gonzales? Is that just lawlessness on the executive part?
Well, the federal government should see the opportunity of marijuana, being able to tax it. Nevada in October of 2019 reported $9.8 million in tax revenue from marijuana. And so the federal government should not see this as an opportunity to enforce Gonzales v. Raich, but they should see it as an economic opportunity.
Well, I may agree with you as a matter of policy, but with respect to how our government functions, that reduces the Supreme Court to, well, it's just our opinion. What the heck? You don't have to obey it if you don't feel like it.
Well, the Supreme Court can purely tell the rules, while it is the power of the executive to enforce these rules. But if the executive does not feel that it is a pressing matter and they don't enforce it, it could be left up to the states and how they decide the issue should be dealt with.
Thank you. So you talked about a few things in your opening presentation about things that were resolved as part of the convention. Are any of those were they really resolved? Are any of them currently issues today?
Well, to go back what we were talking about with the military, while the president and the Congress share responsibility of the military, there is definitely it shows that the president has had more power in controlling the military than the framers initially intended. For example, President Roosevelt's Great White Fleet that he sent halfway around the world and forced Congress to bring them back by increasing their funds and tell them that if they do not for them to come back, then they're just stuck around the world. So he basically blackmailed Congress to bring them back to the US. So it definitely shows how much power the president has over the military and Congress.
Federalist 74 gives presidents, may I continue?
Just finish one really quick sentence.
Okay, Federalist 74 allows for the president to have swift pardons, yet this is unresolved, as can be seen through President Trump pardoning Michael Flynn and how he obstructed in the Mueller investigation.
Got it. Thank you so much. Really appreciated that. Now, do we have time for feedback?
We do have some time for some quick feedback, yes.
Beth, start us off.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the natural, passionate conversation. I wish I could talk to you for a long time. I liked the flow. The stone soup was interesting. I felt like how you threaded it through, but you also hit the notes that you needed to. And you know there are things that you talked about that maybe other folks didn't or wouldn't. The military. You brought up habeas corpus, about emergency powers, and you tied it right back to the Constitution. And then in follow-ups, you were able to unpack some of that a little bit more clearly and give us, court cases and really ground it. And, we just talked about Federalist 74 and the clauses. So overall, I really think you did a nice job, and it really felt like a conversation. It didn't feel forced, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate the balanced approach between all of you.
Terrific. John?
I thought y'all did a very good job. I do like the fact that you're not afraid to say that you were split in your opinion on certain issues, and that's going to be natural. So don't be afraid to just admit that. I thought y'all did a particularly good job in bringing out smaller issues in order to explain a larger issue that that some teams may not, particularly the takings issue under the Fifth Amendment. I think that's often overlooked, especially the idea with when you brought up New London. That was a fact. In fact, a problem with the wording of the Connecticut state constitution rather than the U.S. Constitution. Their constitution more broadly defined public use than most other states.
I agree, you did a terrific job. Very nice responses to our questions. And that's where I think we really see the strength of a team and their knowledge is when they can work spontaneously and so responsively and be so well engaged and knowledgeable. The stone soup analogy, I felt like at some point was constraining you. It worked in a way, and then in another way, it just became, do I have to throw everything into that particular framework? And when we got into our questions, we abandoned that framework. So I would push you a little bit on maybe getting tied up too much with one way of responding to all the issues. I think you did a terrific job in not only talking about the obvious issues of disagreement at the convention, like slavery, representation, and so on, but then getting into some of the other nitty-gritty details that modernly have become more problematic for us. So I really applaud you for that. And your ability to respond to questions and engage with us in dialogue, spot on. Nice job, Nevada.
Thank you so much, students.
Thank you.
Okay, judges, I'm going to open up the breakout room for you guys to go back in there. And thank you, judges, for judging.
Thank you, judges, so much.
Okay, and thank you so much, Nevada. And I will say goodbye to you guys now. Good luck in your future